Have you ever wondered why the standard American work week is Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day for a total of 40 hours? The standard 9 to 5 work week. Why are we still working an outdated system in the US with all this technology? The modern American work week wasn't created by one person or one law, although much can be credited to Henry Ford, and we'll cover this later on. It may seem like this schedule has always existed, but it hasn't. Instead, it evolved over centuries through a combination of agriculture, industrialization, religious traditions, labor movements, business innovation, and government legislation. Before the Industrial Revolution and before factories dominated America, there was no standardized work week. Most Americans were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, or small business owners. Their schedules revolved around daylight, weather, planting seasons, and harvest rather than a clock or calendar. During planting and harvest seasons, people often worked from sunrise until sunset. During the winter months, work slowed considerably. There was no universal Monday through Friday schedule, and many religious holidays meant people regularly took breaks throughout the year. Ironically, although work could be physically demanding, historians estimate that many pre-industrial workers actually enjoyed more leisure time throughout the year than factory workers would later experience during the Industrial Revolution. During the early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution transformed the American economy. Factories introduced expensive machinery that owners wanted operating for as many hours as possible to maximize production and profits. Instead of working with nature, workers now worked by the factory clock. Typical factory schedules became 10 to 16 hours per day, 6 days a week, and sometimes even 7 days a week. Many Americans worked between 72 and 100 hours every week. Children frequently worked alongside adults, and workplace safety regulations were virtually non-existent. The concept of work-life balance simply didn't exist. Somehow they convinced us to give up our freedom to go to work at factories with horrible conditions. People literally were dying on the job. The first commonly recognized day off wasn't created because employers wanted workers to rest. Sure, if they say so, we've been told it largely came from Christian tradition. Sunday had long been observed as the Sabbath by most Protestant churches, and employers gradually accepted Sunday as a day of worship and rest. Jewish workers, however, traditionally observed Saturday as their Sabbath, creating conflicts because many employers still required Saturday work. This religious custom eventually helped establish the idea that workers deserved at least one day of rest each week. The fight for the 8-hour day. As factory conditions worsened, workers began organizing. By the mid-1800s, labor unions and social reformers started demanding shorter workdays. Their famous slogan became 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. Workers argued that endless hours led to exhaustion, injuries, declining productivity, and poor family life. Large demonstrations spread across the country. One of the most significant occurred in Chicago during the Haymarket Affair in 1886. Although the protests turned violent after a bomb exploded and several people were killed, the event became a defining moment in the movement for the 8-hour workday and labor reform throughout the United States. While labor unions fought for shorter hours through strikes and protests, one of the biggest turning points came from an unexpected source, industrialist Henry Ford. He proved it can work. In 1926, the Ford Motor Company officially adopted an 8-hour workday and a 5-day, 40-hour work week without reducing workers' pay. At the time, many business leaders believed the decision was reckless. Conventional wisdom suggested that longer hours produce greater output and higher profits. Ford believed the opposite. He found that tired workers made more mistakes, produced lower quality work, and were ultimately less productive. By reducing hours while maintaining wages, productivity actually increased. But Ford understood something even more important. His workers weren't just employees. They were also customers. If people earned good wages and had weekends off, they would have both the time and the money to travel, shop, enjoy entertainment, and purchase products, including the automobiles they built. This philosophy later became known as Fordism, the idea that higher wages, shorter hours, mass production, and consumer spending could all reinforce one another to create economic growth. Ford pretty much invented the 5-day work week. Labor reformers had been advocating for shorter hours for decades. By proving that a shorter work week could actually increase productivity, profits, and consumer demand, He convinced many businesses that treating workers differently could be good business. Then during the 1930s, the United States entered the Great Depression. Millions of Americans were unemployed. Many economists and policymakers argued that if employed workers worked fewer hours, businesses could spread available work among more employees. Reducing the standard work week became part of a broader effort to stabilize employment and improve working conditions. The biggest legal milestone came in 1938, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act. The law established a federal minimum wage, restrictions on child labor, overtime pay requirements. Originally, overtime applied after 44 hours in a work week. Soon afterward, the standard was reduced to 40 hours. It's important to understand what the law actually did. It did not make it illegal to work more than 40 hours. Instead, employers generally had to pay covered employees time and a half for hours worked beyond 40 hours in a week. That additional labor cost encouraged many employers to adopt the 40-hour work week as their standard. So, why 5 days? Why didn't America choose 4 days? Or 6? The 5-day work week became a practical compromise between several competing influences. The 6-day factory schedule, Sunday religious observance, growing acceptance of Saturday as leisure time, labor union demands, productivity research, business leaders like Henry Ford demonstrating that shorter work weeks could increase efficiency and profit. By the 1950s, the Monday through Friday schedule had become the standard across much of American manufacturing and office work. Who created the modern work week? The answer is that no single individual created it. The modern work week was shaped by many different people and events. Labor unions organized workers and fought for shorter hours. Social reformers such as Robert Owen popularized the philosophy of balancing work, rest, and personal life with the slogan, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for recreation, 8 hours for rest. Henry Ford demonstrated that a 5-day work week could actually increase productivity, profitability, and consumer spending. Finally, the federal government reinforced these changes through the Fair Labor Standards Act, making the 40-hour work week the standard for millions of American workers. So, why does the 40-hour week still exist? Perhaps the more interesting question isn't how the 40-hour work week was created, but why it has changed so little. Since the early 1900s, technology has transformed nearly every industry. Automation, computers, robotics, and now artificial intelligence have dramatically increased how much one worker can produce in an hour. Yet despite these enormous gains in productivity, the standard work week remains largely unchanged. Some economists argue that rising productivity should have translated into shorter work weeks and more leisure time. Others contend that higher consumer expectations, global competition, and an economy built on continual growth have encouraged businesses to maintain roughly the same schedule. More than a century after workers first marched for 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will, the 40-hour work week remains one of the defining features of American working life, born from the intersection of labor activism, business innovation, religious tradition, and government policy. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that someone wanted to build the perfect system for managing millions of people. Would you tell them to work whenever they wanted? Probably not. Instead, you'd have everyone wake up at roughly the same time, commute at the same time, eat lunch at the same time, go home at the same time, watch television at the same time, and repeat the cycle 5 days a week for the next 40 or 50 years. Call it stability, or call it efficiency. It certainly sounds better than population management. After all, if everyone follows the same schedule, transportation becomes predictable. Schools can train future workers around that schedule. Banks can operate around that schedule. Government offices can operate around that schedule. Businesses can forecast around that schedule. Entire industries can plan around millions of people behaving almost identically every Monday morning. Convenient, isn't it? Then sprinkle in just enough free time to recover, but not so much that people begin asking uncomfortable questions like, do I actually need to live this way? Why is productivity many times higher than it was a century ago, yet most of us still work roughly the same number of hours? If technology keeps replacing human labor, why doesn't it replace more of the work week? Of course, everyone gets 2 days off. Just enough time to recover. Just enough time to run errands. Just enough time to spend money. Then it's back to Monday. Maybe that's simply the most efficient way to organize a modern economy. Or maybe it's the greatest recurring subscription model ever created, except instead of subscribing with your credit card, you subscribe with your time. Add increasing taxation and inflation to the equation, and you have the perfect machine to control the masses. They can work for a living, but never enough to get ahead, never able to start their own farm or business. Yes, this way you can never rival the controllers of the system. After you sold your time in a job all week, you have no more time and energy to escape the system. See, if one that encourages every child to become an entrepreneur, or one that teaches punctuality, obedience, following instructions, working in groups, asking permission before speaking, and responding to bells that signal when it's time to start, stop, eat, and go home, the straight A students are really just the best in following the system. A prison for your time and mind. Sound familiar? Many critics have argued that the modern public school system developed alongside the Industrial Revolution in ways that reflected the needs of factories and large organizations. Standardized schedules, age-based classrooms, bells, attendance, and uniform curricula can all be viewed as preparing students for life in an industrial or nowadays corporate workforce. Organizations such as the General Education Board, funded by John D. Rockefeller, invested heavily in expanding education during the early 20th century. He is also credited with saying, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." But supporters viewed these efforts as increasing literacy and educational opportunity. Yeah, sure. However, I argue that they also help create a system designed to produce reliable employees for an industrial economy rather than independent thinkers or entrepreneurs. Whether you see that as a necessary response to a rapidly industrializing nation, or as the foundation of a system that rewards conformity of the masses to the benefit of the few, is ultimately up to you. After all, schools prepare students for work. The work week prepares adults for employment. The financial system encourages continual consumption. Maybe that's simply how a modern economy functions. Or maybe it's worth asking whether a system designed over a century ago is still the one that best serves people living in the 21st century. Or maybe it's working as designed, and when you really look at it, modern day slavery is what the system truly is.